Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. Welcome to the Goethe-Institut, the German Cultural Center of Sri Lanka. And it is my pleasure to welcome this evening Ronya Othmann, author from Germany. And Ronya Othmann is on a South Asia tour on the invitation of the Goethe-Institutes in the region. She has traveled to India. Now she is here in Sri Lanka, and she has participated in the first Ceylon Literary and Art Festival in Kandy, and after that in Colombo until yesterday at the public library with several readings and panel discussions. I'm very happy that we were able to organize this special evening to discuss her debut novel, Die Sommer, a novel that takes place partly in Germany and partly in the Kurdish Yazidi region in Syria, actually the Syrian-Turkish border region. And the reason why we have invited her is that her novel, here is the German version, Die Sommer. Her novel was translated recently into Sinhala by Ashani Ranasinghe. Here is the Sinhala version that you can find in bookstores. It's published by Diluna Books, also online. Sarasabi bookstores has the book. The German original, by the way, who is able to read it, we will have it soon in our library. We are still waiting for the English translation, but the German original, you can already, if you're a participant of the library, you can already borrow it online in our e-library, the online in digital form. Ronya is also a poet. She had a poetry session at the Ceylon Literary Festival, an essayist and a journalist who is writing for several major German newspapers. The reading at the Goethe-Institut will be moderated by Nadishka Aloysius, who I would like to thank that she is again moderating for us a literary evening. The evening will be in English, but you can also ask questions in other languages, Sinhala, for example. And by the way, we have a printout of the Sinhala translation of what Ronya is going to read from her novel. After that, as I said, Q&As, followed by refreshments in our project. I wish you an interesting evening, and thanks for coming.
Okay, let's get started. I'd really like to know first how you got into writing.
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah.
Syria? Or I can speak also a bit louder. No, it's. Yeah, yes, thank you. Yes, hello everyone. First, thank you for coming, and thank you also for the invitation to Goethe-Institut. Yes, how I came into writing, I don't know. I started to write, like, I always wrote as a child, as a teenager, something. And I wrote the first time, like, for an audience was like to write, when I started to write diary. And my sister started to write diary, and we both had a diary. And we had a lock, you could lock it, but we knew it was easy to open. And we knew that my sister, and always knew when I was writing, she would read. So
It's the first time I heard that a diary was written for somebody else.
Yeah. So I addressed somewhere like my where I was like, be sometimes a little mean or make some jokes, because I knew she was reading it, and she did the same with her diary, and she knew that I was reading her diary secretly, and it was somehow it was fun to not write for yourself or diary, but
That's very interesting. So The Summers was published in 2020,
yes.
and it's your debut novel.
Yeah.
Okay, so since then, what else have you been? I know you write poetry.
Yes. I started to write 2014, but I can later tell more about it. And then since then I wrote the poetry collection, which looks like this, but it's a bit, the book doesn't look that good anymore. It's a bit traveled much. And the next novel will come out in March.
That's next month.
Yeah, that's a novel. Back again. It's a documentary novel. It's about the Yazidi genocide. So and it's a bit different, I think, in comparison to the first one. And I also wrote some, essays. I have a column. I write every second week. I write a column for Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. It's a newspaper. And so tomorrow I need to finish next one.
Oh, okay. Deadlines.
Yeah, it's like,
Okay, thank you. So I have a lot of questions about the book, but before we get into that, perhaps you could read a little bit for us so that everyone gets an idea of what it's about. And hopefully, we tend to have this problem where I have read the book, the writer is here. Most people in the audience have no idea what we're talking about because they haven't read the book. And we don't want to give too many spoiler alerts also, but let's see how we can manage this.
Yes, I will read it. I wrote it in German, but it's the English translation by Gary Schmidt, and I will read from the beginning. So, on the main road, there was a sign with flaking letters that formed the name Tel Khatun. The sign was cockeyed, perhaps because of the wind. Just a few meters past it, a narrow gravel lane branched off from the main road. It led past garden fences into the village. The village used to have a different name. It had only been called Tel Khatun since the time when all other villages and cities in the region had also been given new names. It was just one of many villages between Tirmizi and Ramelan, one that nobody just wandered into, one you only went to if you knew the people who lived there. Leyla could walk down the lane to the village in her mind, 10 steps from Tel Khatun's metal sign to where the lane branched off, then 15 steps to her grandparents' garden, and then between her grandparents' garden and their neighbor's garden, 300 steps on the gravel line, where most of the time the chickens were already coming toward you, and then past the left side of the fountain to her grandparents' house. Her grandparents' house stood at the entrance to the village, its garden poking into the landscape like a long green tongue. If you walked past the olive trees, orange trees, flower beds and tobacco plants, as far as the rear wire fence, you could look back to the main road you had come from. All around were fields, and beyond the fields, a mountain range rose, in the distance, the Turkish border. If Leyla had not known what was happening on that border, she might have thought the mountains were beautiful. The house was made from the same clay as the landscape, even having the same color. Admittedly, Leyla had only been to the village in the summer. From her father she knew that in springtime the country was covered in green, there were far more plants blooming, and the ground was damp and lumpy. The grass only faded over the course of the summer month, under the hot sun, the heat dissociating the earth, and the wind pushing more and more dust before it. Every year, the more the summers advanced, the more desolate the landscape became. Leyla had spent entire days lying on the thin foam mats in the house, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling beams were thick tree trunks whose spores had been caught and their bark shaved off. Above the beams was the vaulted straw, and above that the roof. was sealed with a layer of clay so that no rain would seep in. The windows were small and deep, the walls thick in order to keep out the summer heat and winter cold. There were only two narrow doors. The metal one led to the courtyard on the street, the wooden one to the garden out back. Many years ago, all the village men had gathered to build the house. They had fired bricks out of clay, then hauled and staked them. They worked for 3 days until the house was finished. Chicken lived in the courtyard next to the house, as in all the village courtyards. Their dropping lay sprinkled everywhere on the dusty ground. 2 loft beds stood there on a small narrow metal feet. Those were the summer beds. In the winter they slept on the wool mattresses and rugs inside the house. The house was not large, just 2 rooms in a small corridor. There was no furniture, just pillows on the floor with holes in the covers and their thin mattresses. The walls were painted white, but the paint was flaking off, revealing a mixture of clay and straw that had been smeared over the fired bricks. Hanging from the ceiling in the middle of both rooms were large fans that spun incessantly throughout the summer. On the grandparents' property there were smaller houses, not meant to be lived in. The kitchen and shower were in one of them, in another the pantry. There was a hut for the chicken, another one for the bees, and in one of the summers, sometimes later on, there was even an outhouse. The village was as flat as the landscape surrounding it. Only in the village center there was a small hill for the dead. It wasn't really a hill, but more of a small mound. Leyla wondered if this hill had been constructed by people, or if the people had chosen it in order to build their village around it, or if it had slowly grown up, swelling from generations of the dead that had been buried there over the course of the centuries. For there were such hills in other villages too. Grandmother called dying the day you changed your clothes. Leyla imagined all the dying people being handed freshly washed clothing made of coarse material the color of the earth. Her grandmother's phrase about the day when you changed your clothes popped into her mind again, suddenly as she walked down the empty street. It wasn't raining, but the air was damp. The arrival board on the streetcar stop showed 5 minutes. Beside her, there were 3 men waiting. One sat on the bench and typed something into his phone. The other was wearing an orange safety vest and held a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. The third just stood there, smoked and stared into space. They didn't even turn their heads when Leyla joined them. The minutes on the destination board fell from 5 to 4, from 4 to 3, 3 to 2, 2 to 1, then the streetcar arrived. Leyla put out her backpack again. You always tell a story from its end, she thought, even if you start with the beginning. Every summer, they flew to the country where her father had grown up. The country had 2 names. One of them could be found on maps, globes, and official documents. The family used the other one. Both names could be assigned their respective territory. If you laid these territories on top of another, they overlapped. One of the countries was Syria, the Syrian Arab Republic. The other one was Kurdistan. Their country, Kurdistan, was located inside the Syrian Arab Republic, but extended beyond its borders. It had no official recognized frontiers. Her father said they were the rightful owners of the land, but in spite of that, were only tolerated and often not even that. Later, Leyla would look in vain for Kurdistan in the school atlas. The Europeans are to blame, her father said, and cracked a sunflower seed between his teeth. To be more precise, France and Great Britain, when they divided it up among themselves on the drawing board with a pencil and a ruler 100 years ago. Since then, our country extends across 4 states. You must not tell anyone the name of the country, her father said.
When someone asks you where you're going, then you tell them to your grandparents' house. The journey to her grandparents' country was long. They always had to change planes at several airports. Sometimes they only had a layover for a few hours, sometimes a whole day or longer. Leyla didn't mind. On the contrary, she would have liked to stay longer at the airports. She loved the orderly, air-conditioned waiting rooms, the transit area with its duty-free shops where you could buy expensive perfumes, expensive makeup, and expensive alcohol, the long corridors that hundreds of people walked through daily without leaving behind a trace, from all corners of the globe to all corners of the globe. Leyla loved that everybody here was equally a stranger to everyone else. The personnel to the passengers to each other. In a certain sense, even the airports to their surroundings. When they finally arrived and the hot wind blew in their faces as they climbed up out of the plane, how Leyla loved that moment. Every time she stopped for a few seconds on the gangway, inhaling deeply and gazing into the landscape. She would have stayed longer up there if the passengers behind her had not pushed her and her mother not grabbed her by her arm and pulled her forward. Palm trees behind the runway, the dry earth, the big glass facade, its star-shaped ornaments, the smooth tile floor. The life-size gold-framed portraits of the president and the president's father. Was it in Aleppo or Damascus? She couldn't remember. Nowadays, the only flights left were domestic, if there were any at all, for they had fought at the airports too. Military planes had taken off and landed there. She had seen the pictures on television but didn't want to think about them. Back then, when traveling every summer vacation to her grandparents' house, they had no inkling of all that, or did they?
Thank you so much. Just listening to you read that, I was kind of reliving the moment when I was reading it 2 weeks ago. And I remember opening the book and just starting. And the description of the place really drew me into the story. And my first reaction was, wow, I could just see it kind of coming to life in my mind. And because since I'm also a writer, you're told the first 10 pages or whatever, you have to hook the reader. And for those who don't know, if you're trying to find an agent to get your book published, they generally ask for first 5 pages or first 10 pages, and then they decide whether they like your book or not. So, some people say that's not fair, it gets interesting later on, but you can really kind of see the impact when you hear the first few pages and it draws you in so much. And that actually takes me into the next question that was on my list, which is that the place is so important to the whole story that you're trying to tell. There is a little bit of a reference of how the British and the French drew a line, and we hear the name Kurdistan and all that, but I know I really didn't have any knowledge of this area and the history and the geopolitical problems relating to that very heavy-handed, let's call it, drawing a line and dividing nations. So if you could kind of give us that background that we need, because we needed to understand the story, and also a little bit into the people, the Yazidi people.
Yes, Leyla's family is a Yazidi, their religion background is Yazidi and they speak Kurdish. So in the Kurdish people, there are many religions within the Kurdish community. So there are like Muslim Kurds, like Sunni, Shia, there are Zoroastrian, which are like Pals, the same as the Parsis. So there, and I don't know, there were like Jewish Kurds, Shabak, they are many minorities. And so they were living in this like Syria, Iraq, and Turkey, Iran region. There are like 40 million Kurds, I think, living there between the border somehow. And the countries, like also, like in fact, Turkey is also not like there are also other minorities. In Syria also has more minorities. Sometimes some you may heard of because of the war and things happened there, but there are also, for example, Druze people, or there are in Iraq Mandaean people, so some minorities never maybe heard of, I didn't even know. So, and like Syria is since long time in the hand of the Assad family, and the father was a dictator, and he died, and the son became dictator, and for it they defined Syria as a Syrian Arab Republic, like an Arab country, but there are non-Arab minorities, for example, the Kurdish people. And there was even, like, a big amount of the Kurds were stateless. So also in my family they were stateless, and it was some kind of like divide and rule thing, because it was very like, it doesn't, there were some Kurds who had the Syrian citizenship, but it could be like one brother had the Syrian citizenship, the other siblings, they didn't have the Syrian citizenship. This was very like, there was no logic in it. And there were like two categories in Syria, like the Ajnabi, who were considered as foreigners, even if they were from there, and the people like were considered as illegal there. So that's the background somehow.
I know it's very complicated to kind of explain in a few minutes.
Yeah, so it's the Yazidi, the Kurdish, they are like a double minority. So they have faced religious, like from the religious side, because they are not Muslim minority, and from the nationalist side in Turkey because they're not Turkish, and in Syria because they're not Arab. So yeah.
Okay. So something to Google and check if you are really interested in knowing more. Right, let's move on to the story. So, is it Leyla or Leyla?
I say Leyla, but I think there exists Leyla too.
I will just say Leyla. In the first half of the book, Leyla is very young, and everything is given to us through her perceptions and her point of view. And I found it very interesting how you had written that, where it really felt authentic, like you're listening to these little girls with random thoughts running through her head. So if you could just take us through how you got to that.
Yeah, I didn't want to write a novel. I started to write about the village. I just wanted to write about the village, and I started to write 2014 when there were these protests against the Assad regime. It was really brutally reacting. And then there was the civil wars in Syria, and there were Islamist terrorist groups taking more and more territory. And you could see the news, like you see, like the Islamic State was getting more and more black on the map. So everyone tried to get out from the minorities, because there's a long history of persecution and massacres on the Yazidi, and they knew, and they were also warned in my grandparents' village. There was one guy they knew from like long ago, and then when the war started, he was with Al-Qaeda. And he said, okay, Al-Qaeda also did in Iraq massacres on the Yazidi, but they knew him, and he said, okay, I'm there, we will not harm you, but we will no longer be there, we're the Islamic State. I cannot protect you no longer, so they tried to get out. And then that was the reality at the time when I started to write. And then I knew that the village and everything will not be there as it was before, because everything, like the places, like everyone knows Syria, like the cities were bombed by Assad, the Islamist groups were there. I think even if I think the country was somehow broken before, because it was a very cruel dictatorship, it was like destruction of everything. And then I started to write as what I was a child and I was there every year, and I started to write because the things they got somehow important. And I just wrote about the houses and how everything smelled, about the food, whatever. And then I needed someone who. Then I had I created Leyla like a camera who's going there with as a child. And then I thought
I like when you say she's like a camera, she's just recording everything. That I definitely got that when I was reading it.
And she's very passive, she's just looking, and she's also very, you can put her, in Germany she's like this, and then she's going there and back. And then I also said, okay, I could not tell the story as I wanted to tell it before, but suddenly I had a story somehow, because it's all, the memory is so important, because everything I was telling there, I would not tell if there wasn't this war, and then also the genocide on the Yazidi people, because Islamic State also committed then this genocide in Iraq and Syria, and this changed also how I told the story, and then I needed to go and Leyla needed to tell her memory, and I needed to have another construction, so I changed it.
Yeah, that idea of memory, and it's definitely there, and it's like there's no chronological order. It felt like she's at different stages of childhood at different times, and I couldn't really pinpoint, she feels younger when she's talking about this, but then she feels a little older when she's talking about this, and it kind of, time was fluid. Yeah, I understand that now when you explain it, why it is like that. So it was definitely a bit challenging to kind of keep track of, because we think in terms of a timeline, and then when you read a book that doesn't seem to have a timeline, it takes a little adjusting, but it was a good challenge, I would say. Okay, so I have a quote from Salman Rushdie in Imaginary Homelands. He says, "If we do look back, we must also do so in the knowledge which gives rise to profound uncertainties, that our physical alienation from our homeland almost inevitably means that we will not be capable of reclaiming precisely the thing that was lost, that we will, in short, create fictions, not actual cities or villages." So you were talking about starting with writing the place, the village. So how accurate do you think your description actually is when you think of it in this way, that we can never really go back, we can never really remember the way it was?
Yes, I think it's always, if you write the fiction stuff, even if you would be accurate and really do it in a scientific way, then there is fiction, because the thing you tell first, or the way you tell the things, with which language you tell something, with where you start, where you end, how the sentence are, that also make somehow there the fiction, I think, start. So even if you're as accurate as but you're never, because what happened before and after and whatever, also structures somehow the memory, and I tried to be as accurate. I did research, I talked with people, but still sometimes I remember something and someone remembers another thing, and that also changed. If I was listening to the memory of other people, it changed my memory, so it made their memories also fiction. So, and then I put it in a novel, so there I was working on a dramaturgy, and then this always also changed the memory somehow. Then it became fiction somehow, even if it's the villages. It is this village, and some things. Leyla is in a camera, but some things exist like that. But yeah,
I guess you have to draw the line somewhere and say, okay, I'm not going to worry about accuracy too much. Otherwise, you would get kind of stuck in that.
But I try to be accurate. But even if I'm as accurate as I can be, then there's fiction, because something I don't have, even if I tell one thing and another thing not, so that also makes a difference somehow. Yeah.
Okay, so keeping with Leyla's perceptions and memories, another thing that really struck me was how she very casually refers to things that we as adults would be like reacting to in a much bigger way. Like she talks about all these stories that she hears from people, how somebody lost a limb stepping on a landmine, and how they had to bribe their way through the airport. And there are so many stories that she's kind of telling us that, you know, this person told me or that person told me. Usually her father or grandfather, I think, who kind of transmit the stories. But the way she says it, and she just accepts that violence. And while I was reading it, I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's like, and it's other stories, things that you made up, or did you interview people and actually get real stories?
No, the violence I didn't make up. The violence, like other things I made up, but like the teenage years of Leyla, I made some things up, but or other things, but the violence I didn't make up. Like that's because I could not like just make. I think it would feel strange to imagine how a Turkish, because Leyla's father is in a Turkish prison when he goes to Germany, and my father also was in a Turkish prison, and I knew the story since I was a child because they're telling about it all the time, like in my family are telling all these, but also they tell the stories about, and I could not like the landmine, so I could not like invent something, like there was this, also I think that's also very, they do it like, they tell them like funny stories, even if they're not funny at all. Like there's the story of the landmine and one neighbor. There are different types of landmines, and one neighbor found some plastic thing, and he thought it was like good thing for put water there for the chicken. And then it was a landmine, and then he lost a hand. So and then but there are jokes about it, and it's like. The violence, I think it's also a way to deal with violence, or the stories about from the prison, they are also always telling like it was a joke somehow. So, and I think, it's somehow to deal with the things. But the violence I didn't make up, so I could not somehow. But I had like, I was told the story, but I worked over the language and over the dramaturgy. That's where I worked.
Okay. Staying with the idea of storytelling, I was also thinking about how important storytelling is in general, where especially in countries like ours, like even in Asian countries, a lot of us grew up listening to stories from grandparents and so on. But then I was thinking, as we become more westernized, especially I can see this happening in Colombo, where you're living in a smaller nuclear family, you're not really living in the same house with your grandparents, your uncles and aunts, and that storytelling culture is changing. And do you think that might be like affecting the way we see ourselves, our identity, our cultural identity, our ideas of community? Would you see it happening in other places you've been to?
Yes, I think especially in the Yazidi, there is like the holy texts. They are all oral. There's there's a myth about one written book which got lost. But I think this, or many also, many think this is not. There was no written book, but they invented some written book because of the persecution, because they have no book, and also also the village in the novel. It's like the grandparents' generation, they couldn't read or write, so like the oral tradition is very important. And some people, like for example my father, he's a good because he grew up with people telling stories, and also and it's also a profession somehow. In the Kurdish culture there is this Denglish tradition. It's not just grandmother sitting on the around the fire and telling some story, but there's also like they're getting training in there. It's like you need to learn that this oral tradition. It's also like I once was in a Kurdish city in Turkey in a Dekbeş house. There's a Dekbeş house where they receive the stories somehow, and they do it over like half an hour, and you need to have the voice and
it's a bit like singing but repeating very long, and this is not easy. So this, I think this, if they don't train it, it will get lost somehow. But still, now we have recording, so we have like some on YouTube, and also I think there's also because of the war, I think this tradition is also in danger, because there is, for example, there's a Yazidi Kurdish scholar from Armenia, and he's like almost 90, and he's traveling to all the villages still, and he lives in Vienna, but he records everything, or tries to, because he said, okay, it will get lost, and also, yeah, I think that's a problem. But also we have now books, and we can record things, so maybe we can also keep something.
So books like yours are also important in that sense, because it's a recording.
Yes,
it's fiction, but it still has a lot of that.
That's true. But still, the thing is also that there are sometimes one story and there are different versions.
Yeah,
And
the
now,
danger of a single story.
And then it's one story. Yeah.
So we need to collect
Yeah.
more. Okay. Right, so this was getting a bit dark and heavy, so I have a bit of a lighter question. I started laughing at one point, very inappropriately I'm sure, because she's describing the terrors of the Assad regime and all that. Because she talks about how they're afraid to even say his name. And I immediately went, oh my gosh, Voldemort and J.K. Rowling, and he who must not be named. And I could actually hear Hermione's line from the movie, fear of a name only increases fear of the thing itself. So I was just wondering, like, I know when you write, sometimes you're not thinking too much and you just write. So that impression has stayed in the final version. Did you notice that there was that kind of echo from another book that we are so very familiar with? Did anyone point it out to you?
And the name of the thing, like
that they don't want to say Assad's name, they're so scared of him.
But
because you get that in the Harry Potter books where they are so afraid of saying Voldemort's name. They always say, he who must not be named. They never say Voldemort.
I think
so. I was thinking Assad is another Voldemort.
Assad, there was this joke with the Hafiz al-Adas, like that. It's the lentils. They call it like not like, because it's like, I think it's a lion, and then they make something out of it, of Assad. Like in my family, they said it like they don't call it. They call it like not Assad the lion, Assad the lentil somehow, like to make fun of him. But I think it's in Yazidism there is the one thing, you're not a name, you're not allowed to name the evil somehow, and that has nothing to do with Assad, but it's with in the religion you're not. There's some rule. There are many rules which seem also like you're not allowed to wear, like in traditional blue. You're not allowed to shower on Wednesdays, and you're not allowed to eat like the salad, the green salad. Because they're like there's a reason because of this. Because when one very like important person in Yazidism, somebody tries to kill him. He hid in the salad somewhere, and then he was not found. That's the one story. There are many stories there. I don't. Some of them are also that. When you're not used to it, it seems strange. Why don't shower on Wednesday, whatever. And then there's this that people are not. This also is a problem because they don't name they would not say the word devil. So. And because they don't believe that there is something like this evil, so yeah, that's one thing. And then often when the Yazidis were like, there was violence against them, it was because people said they prayed to the devil. So that's some kind of old like cliché about Yazidis that they pray to the devil because the important there's very holy angel. It's the peacock, and they say, okay, it's the devil. And because why? Because he's afraid of the devil. So that's also part of the persecution. So, and then
Okay.
the religious is complicated.
So my mind was making connections.
With Assad, yeah, with Assad, there's the story with Assad that they give him like a joke name.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the second half, okay, now we've talked a lot about Leyla's childhood. So in the second half, she graduates from high school, more or less as the Arab Spring is kind of taking off. And I really liked how there were parallels between, you see these German students celebrating and they're on drugs and alcohol and whatnot at a lake. And then at the same time, her father is watching everything unfold back home where people are on the road and they're so high on the idea of freedom. Can you tell us something about writing those and how you made those choices?
Yes. Yes. It was like I had the memory, and then in the second part of the novel, also what made Leyla remember everything somehow. And it was also, I wanted to tell about what's our reality. We are somewhere, our family is in the war, we are here, the revolution takes place, we have hope to go to one day can return in a free country. We have, even if we don't have connection, we see everything on television, on the internet, and it's for Leyla it's like living. It's a difficult time because she's a young woman who lives in Germany and wants to have a good time somehow, and then also at the same time this revolution starts, and it's so strange, like to be in the safe Germany, and then the other part they're going on the street and they die for freedom somehow.
Yeah, that brings me to the next bit, which is really, I felt this part of the story is also a lot about guilt, because that euphoria that everyone was feeling, very quickly turns sour. So I also had to kind of think back, because these events took place a long time ago, and I remember watching it on TV. But I had to kind of find my bearings and, oh yeah, I remember this happened and that happened. And she talks about how she's trying to go to university at that point, but she's just like a robot. She's just going, she's not listening to any of the lectures. And it's a different type of war trauma, I was just thinking. And there's this point where she says she wants to actually pick up a gun and shoot someone because she's so full of rage and helplessness. And those passages really struck me.
It's also like there's this very brutal dictatorship where everything was so strict. Like there were people who came to prison because they had a dream they become president. Like when they slept at night, dreamt they had a dream that they become president, told a neighbor, and then they came to prison. It was like this. Or there was a bet, someone you gave the son of her, from the secret police, a bad grade, and you can land somewhere. Or it was people were disappearing. So we knew, we never, every time we went there, we knew what this country is, or that there's this, the spies are everywhere. You have always the picture of the president. You have this propaganda, and people were so they could not, in my opinion, they could not believe that this happens now, this protest. They never thought that there will be a possibility that this regime will break, and that there could be some freedom or some human rights and some dignity. And then it went so bad, and I think also for all who had families or friends there, it was really to see like you're in a safe place, and they could, like, they died or they could or injured or had to, it's really you cannot like draw some line or like live your life somehow. You're always in the mind there, and that also happens to Leyla, and she's and I think the thing what you was telling is also like they tried to get the family out, and it was very difficult, and if you she's like under pressure somehow.
I found those passages so suspenseful because the book went from being these lovely memories of a little girl to almost like a suspense thriller at one point, because they're so helpless trying to get the family out, and her life is like stuck because she's so worried about her grandmother and the others who are there. And that also reminded me of another book that I read. I don't know whether you've read it, The Girl from Aleppo, Nujin's story. So I mentioned this to Marie as well, that I had read both books, and I was like, because in that, it's Nujin's autobiography, and she's a girl in a wheelchair, and she's in Aleppo. And the story is basically about how she and her family get out, and her sister pushes the wheelchair across 8 countries to get from Syria to Germany eventually. So I read your book, and there's all this suspense about, oh my gosh, how's the family going to get out? And then I read that one, which is essentially the family getting out with so much difficulty. And I was just thinking, all these stories sometimes come together to give us the bigger picture, and it somehow made a lot of sense to me, and it kind of completed that for me somehow. Because you say that she sees the grandmother coming out of the plane and she's so happy, and I was wondering, how difficult it would have been for them to actually leave.
Yeah, but for her it was lucky because they got the grandmother on the list, because when you had family in Syria, it was difficult, but you could get them on lists, and they could go, there was a list for Lebanon, and then later there was also for Turkey that they could go, and then they had the permission to go with the plane, but because Ara went on a boat, and a bit like easier to go, of course, or safer. But the thing also, like for her, there was somehow it's somehow a happy ending when they finally get out, but it's also like a loss. They had to go, and the thing is, you never know, because I wrote it was really similar to what we experienced. It was, there was like electricity cut, and you didn't hear from your family for 3 days. You didn't know whether they're alive. You heard from someone from not a close family, but who was in a bus, and then they shot 3 people. We didn't know why. So you never know what happened to them, and there were this Islamist group, and it was really like every day there was a time where you're not like you're waking up and we heard of them, they're fine. You didn't know what happened somehow, and some were not that lucky. So
Okay, so we'll just move on a little bit. Coming back to the whole issue of names, which was there from the beginning, the passage that you read itself, where it was about the name of the village and how it had a traditional name, and then the Syrian government gave it a name, and that kind of comes throughout the book. The father has a name, then he has another name, and then you hear about these rebels who have a name, and then it's not the name they died with because they're under another name, but they're remembered by that name, and the whole issue of like identity and the importance of your name. And I was also thinking, like, there are so many people in Western countries who don't, I'm not talking about like refugees, but just normal Chinese, Indians, who take a like westernized name just so that those people can find it easier to talk to you. And I yesterday, while I was looking on Facebook, this Doctor Who post came up. So if any of you are Doctor Who fans, the new Doctor Who is a Rwandan, and there were some people who were like, oh, we can't say that name. And then someone else was like, well, if you can say Tchaikovsky and Schwarzenegger, you can say Shutikatwa, it's not that difficult. So it's out there, people are discussing it. So what do you think about this whole issue of names?
Yes, it's also for many minorities, like also for safety. Some Armenian people they had different names, and also because the names were not, it was not allowed. For example, in Turkey, it was only allowed to have like Turkish names, and they call it Kurds. They got Turkish names, and then when the families came to Germany, the Kurdish government, the Turkish government sent a list, also the Syrian government, and there were some lists for names. And then, if you want to name your Kurdish, Armenian, like whatever minority child in that name from that language, it was even not possible in Germany at a particular time, because the list they came from Turkey, for example. They say, okay, in Turkish list from the Turkish state, like Kurdish didn't exist for them, and there were only Turkish names. So it was, and it's also like to be. We know. I think everyone, like the last years with the Kurdish woman from Iran, Gina Mahsa Amini, you heard, I'm sure you heard, and like Mahsa was the Persian name because she was not allowed to have a Kurdish name in her family. Like in her family, they called her Gina, which is like Kurdish name. So it's still until today you cannot be the person you are, and I think it does much for the people. And also like for Leyla also, it was the same. My family, when they had no citizenship, but they had official like documents somehow, where like there was a document that they lived there somehow, but it was not a Syrian citizenship. And I read the names, and that was my cousins, my aunt. I don't know, I was like, where are these people? I never heard that name. Like they had some Arabic name officially, but never, I didn't even know. So yeah, and I think it's I think that's kind of, but because if you're getting used, because for me, long time Turkish name, but we grew up with Turkish classmates, friends, so I cannot speak Turkish, but I can learn a name, or I can learn the Chinese name if I heard it a few times. Sometimes it's not that easy, but you can like learn it easily somehow, and why not? So, and also maybe also some kind of German name could be difficult for others. So yeah.
It happens both ways. I mean, when it's from any other language, it's going to be difficult, but someone's name is so important to them.
So yes. And also it's difficult when you cannot, like, there are many stories about this. But it's still not that easy, because there's like in the Kurdish, like the political Kurdish, they're like started to, because for example the Kurdish city of in Turkey there's the city Diyarbakir, that's the Turkish name, but the Kurdish name is Ahmet. So the Kurdish people started to call it, the political ones, Ahmet. But it had also an Armenian name, Tikranakert, but the Armenians were killed, and there was this genocide Armenian. I think which name is now the right one? Like the Kurdish is somehow right, because it's a Kurdish city, but it was also an Armenian city, so we should also not forget the Armenian name. So it's not that, like it's not, also many, in northern Syria there is a big Assyrian community, and they are often like, the names are in Kurdish and in Assyrian. There are two names, so I think, yeah, maybe we need to use both.
A lot of things to think about. Okay, so it's 8 o'clock. I think we can start winding up. But before we go to the Q&A, would you like to read some of your poetry?
I will read the English translation and also in German, but not all in German.
So we will be having a Q&A once we listen to her poetry, so I hope we have some questions from the audience.
Du zeichnest die Karte der Dörfer in einer Landschaft aus Staub. Ein Erdwall, der wie eine Narbe in die Felder zeigt, Sandsäcke einer Mauer, du zählst das Ende. Wer hat diese Flüsse umgeleitet und wie sind diese brennenden Bäume zu verstehen? Du gehst abseits der Straßen, trägst, was du gesehen hast, in einen Blick, die Berge, die Felsen, die Steine. Was in Rauch aufgeht und bleibt, was dir diese Sprache schuldet, ein Wort, ein Satz, wovon du weißt. Abends verstummen die Hühner im Hof, komm zurück, wenn es dunkel ist, damit du keinen Schatten an den Hauswänden hinterlässt. You draw the map of the villages in the landscape of dust. An earthwork points like a scar into the fields, sandbags are wall. You count the end. Who diverted these rivers, and how should we understand these burning trees? You walk beside the roads, carry what you've seen in your gaze. The mountains, the cracks, the stones. What goes up and smoke and remains, what this language owes you. One word, one line, you already know. In the evening, the hens in the courtyard fell silence, come back after it's grown dark, so you cast no shadow on the house walls. There's a word in it, which is in a language no one can speak anymore. It's Akkadian, and it's the name of Babylon. So if I read this word, maybe I don't spell it right because no one knows anymore. Im Juni brennen die Felder. Du suchst, was nicht mehr zu finden ist in diesem Land, das sich von Checkpoint zu Checkpoint erstreckt. Dein Kopf, der auf das Polster sackt, dein Schlaf wie diese Gleise, die sich in der Wüste verlieren, Ka-Degi-Ra. Als hättest du dir es eben ausgedacht, als du nicht mehr weißt, wie lange du schon gefahren bist. Wie ein Zug, den du schon von Weitem siehst, die kleinen schwarzen Fenstergesichter, Hände winken und Taschentücher, die der Fahrtwind nimmt. Wie das Wasser auf der Straße, das verschwindet, wenn du näher kommst, und der Soldat, der dich an der Grenze weckt, und wenn du versehentlich die falsche Sprache sprichst. The fields burn in June. You see what can no longer be found in this land stretching from checkpoint to checkpoint. Your head sags on the pillow, your sleep, like the strait losing itself in a desert, Ka-Degi-Ra, as though you had just thought it out yourself, when you no longer knew how long you've been driving, like a train, you see from far away. The tiny black windows, faces, hands waving, and handkerchiefs taken with the airstream, like the water on the street vanishing when you draw near, and a soldier who wakes you at the border, and when you inadvertently speak in the wrong tongue. Was nicht in den Akten steht. Du trägst in Plastiktüten, Plastikflaschen, das Gewicht der Landschaft, das ist Basalt, das Wasser bis zum Fluss, was hinweht an kahlen Felsen. Du schaust nicht zurück, was hinter dir liegt, holt dich ein, doch bist du schon weiter. Im Tal Thymian und Wehmut, was du hinüberträgst, das Gewicht von Zedern, unter blauen Wolken, was dich rettet, ist auch dein Verderben. Eine Kahnfahrt ans andere Ufer, Portulak, Blüten wie Wunden, Was dahin geht in Rauch und Wind, die Erinnerung der Vögel an sich selbst, sie ist dir graues Gefieder. Du gehst den Sturz in Abrede, aber im Schlaf. Und die Frage, wie viel kannst du zahlen und wer hat dich verraten? What the documents don't say. You carry plastic bottles and plastic bags, the weight of the landscape basalt, the water to the river that drifts by on barren cracks. You don't look back. What lies behind is gaining ground, but you have already moved on. In the valley, melancholy and time, what you carry over the weight of cedar trees beneath blue clouds. Your redemption is also your undoing, a boat ride to the other side, purslane blooming like wands. What passes on in smoke and wind, the memory of birds, memory of themselves. This memory is their grey plumage. You follow the preach and promise, but in sleep. And the question, how much can you pay and who has betrayed you?
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions?
We have a microphone.
I've got one if no one else is going.
Yes, please do.
Very powerful, very moving. You seem to have a unique experience from Syria and Turkey and Germany, and obviously a lot of trauma there as well in the book. What would, if you were in a position to say something to a policymaker, what would you say?
Depends to who. I was
Assume the policymaker is wise. I think that's the ability to change. Maybe any of the three countries we mentioned. I mean, take it where you want to go.
I think maybe if I would say something to a German one, I would say you're not so. It's not so like because there's sometimes they think it's in Germany in the policy that it's like states are stable. But sometimes the stability is just oppression. And I think also sometimes, for example, in Syria or in Iraq, when Iraq was a long time Saddam Hussein, and before Saddam Hussein there was a middle, like Iraq had problems before, but there was a middle class and also an educated middle class. But also Saddam Hussein, for example, in Iraq really destroyed the society from inside. And also he started wars and things. But in Syria also, Assad played with the minorities to each other. He also I think he broke somehow what was, the great people also in Syria, but I think he somehow what he was doing, for example with the Druze, that they didn't send soldiers anymore to Assad in one area, and then he didn't he let the Islamists pass, and sometimes in Europe they think countries are stable, or they think Iran is somehow stable, but if you look really on the ground what Iran is doing in neighboring countries, destabilize a whole region, or if what Turkey does, it's also, you can talk for hours about the role of Turkey when there was the Islamic State. They let the Islamists pass through Turkey to Syria. And I think what might look as stable is not that stable sometimes, and it is far worse. And I would think they should don't only look if something in their eyes is maybe it's calm, but things are working inside the countries, and I think it's also sometimes also better to look not only until now, so maybe tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, what is happening. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have not read your book. Today, after listening, I found that your book covers a lot of things, history. It's so rich, especially the time Syria was given, the French and the English. And Israel, because the Kurds also suffer, they are scattered in 3 or 4 countries. And I want to find out that there are Kurdish authors, people who express it, like the Armenians, through their suffering, they have depicted in films and books. There are so many Armenian authors in America. The Kurdish people are there in Turkey, Iraq, Iran, but they cannot express themselves in those countries.
But in Germany there are also quite a lot, like Bakhtiar Ali is a very big Kurdish author, and I like him, I like his writings very much. He's also a nice person, but he's from Kurd from Iraq. He was and he left because of Saddam Hussein, and you really, I think it's not magic realism, but people think it's like there's some kind of magic in it. But it's also about war and often or Islam or fundamentalism and whatever. But it's it's the reality is there, but still there's something else. So it's really twisted up. It's very interesting, and his writing is very interesting. It's quite also popular in Germany. He's quite. They read Bakhtiar Ali a lot. Yeah.
More questions, comments?
Anyone wants to share anything?
Is there any reason why you chose to write in third person? Would it have been stronger to write in the first person? It's a very personal story.
Yes, because I wanted to look from a distance to this. It's there's a memory of Leyla, but I also wanted to look from a distance. So how she's how to tell a story, or how I think also identity is somehow fiction. And when I say maybe I need to one day write in the first person, but also the poems are not in the first person. So I think when you say I, it's very could only be one. And when you look, you can ask more, or it could be like this, but it could also be like that. And in the poems, the second person, say you, it could be also an I, it could be also someone absent, it could be you can talk to someone, it could be anyone. So I don't like the first person so much because it's only one, and I think I found it interesting to. Yeah, I didn't know because I'm not. When I was writing, I didn't know some about what in which direction, what was it about somehow. I had followed somehow, but for me, I had in the end, on the protagonist, I also had a question somehow. Did she took this decision because of that? Is it an excuse for something? So.
Thanks a lot for coming. I would like to invite you for refreshments in the courtyard, and then we can also, if some more questions are coming up, Ronya will still be here with us and we can have a discussion in the courtyard with a glass and a bite. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.